Chapter 1. In the beginning, chaos and creation. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine nothing. Not darkness, because darkness is still something. Not silence, because silence implies the absence of sound, and sound hasn't been invented yet. Just nothing. A void so complete that the word void doesn't even do it justice. This was chaos. Not the chaos of a messy room or a traffic jam. The Greeks called it chaos, the gap, the yawn, the primordial emptiness that existed before existence itself decided to show up for work. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a thing. It just was. Or maybe it wasn't. Philosophy gets weird when you go this far back. But here's the thing about nothingness. It's unstable. It's like the universe looked at this endless void and said, yeah, this won't do. And so, from chaos itself, the first real things began to emerge. First came Gaia, Earth. Not the planet you're thinking of, not yet anyway. Gaia was the concept of solid ground, of stability, of something you could actually stand on if standing had been invented. She was foundation itself, broad-breasted and eternal, and she arrived without warning, without birth, simply pulling herself into existence because someone had to be first. Then came Tartarus, crawling up from below, if below even meant anything yet. While Gaia was the promise of land and life, Tartarus was the abyss, the dark and misty pit that would one day become the ultimate prison. Even the gods would learn to fear it. It sat there in the cosmic basement, waiting. And finally, Eros appeared. Not the chubby baby with arrows you see on Valentine's cards, forget that guy. This Eros was the primordial force of attraction, of things wanting to come together. Love, sure, but also gravity, magnetism, the fundamental force that makes anything connect to anything else. Without Eros, everything would have just floated apart like cosmic dust, completely uninterested in each other. So now we've got three things: Earth, the pit, and the force that makes stuff happen. Still not much of a universe, but it's a start. Gaia, being the proactive type, decided she needed a counterpart. She brought forth Kronos the sky. Some stories say she birthed him. Others say he just condensed from the air above her like cosmic dew. Either way, there he was, vast, starry, and stretching in all directions. Where Gaia was solid and nurturing, Kronos was distant and infinite, the great dome of heaven that covered everything. And because Eros was doing its job, Gaia and Kronos came together. Earth and sky embraced, and from their union, the world as we know it began to take shape. Mountains rose where they pressed against each other. Valleys formed where they pulled apart. The space between them became the realm where life would eventually happen, though they were way too busy to think about that yet. Night after night, Kronos descended to cover Gaia completely. There was no sun yet to mark the days, no moon to count the months. Just the endless coupling of earth and sky, creating and creating, filling the void that chaos had left behind. And from this union came children, so many children. But before we get to them, you need to understand something important, something that echoes through this entire story like a curse that nobody can shake. The Greeks had this idea, this terrible, beautiful, tragic idea about fathers and sons. They believed in a cycle, a pattern that kept repeating no matter how hard anyone tried to break it. The son rises against the father falls, the son becomes the father, and then his son rises against him, over and over, forever. It starts here, with Kronos and the children he's about to meet. It continues with Kronos, who you'll meet soon enough, and his paranoid madness. It reaches its peak with Zeus, who's not even born yet, but who's going to turn this cycle into the most spectacular divine war the cosmos has ever seen. See, the thing about power is that everyone who has it is terrified of losing it, and the people closest to you, your own family, are always the most dangerous. They know you, they know your weaknesses, and if a prophecy tells you they're going to destroy you, well, that's when things get really ugly. Kronos is about to learn this lesson. Kronos is going to learn it the hard way. And Zeus? Zeus will spend his entire reign trying to prove he's different, while secretly terrified he's exactly the same, though we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, Gaia and Kronos are still in their honeymoon phase, wrapped around each other, creating the first generation of divine beings. They don't know what's coming. They can't imagine the violence, the betrayal, the cosmic war that will reshape reality itself. Above them, if above means anything yet, the first stars are beginning to appear in Kronos' body, pinpricks of light in the darkness. Below them, Gaia's surface is starting to differentiate into what will one day be forests and oceans and deserts. Between them, in that sacred space where sky meets earth, potential hangs in the air like morning mist. The age of creation is underway. The age of titans is about to begin. And the countdown to the first great war, the war that will end this age and birth the age of gods, has already started, though nobody knows it yet. In the distance, if you listen carefully, you might hear something, not quite a sound, more like a feeling, the universe holding its breath. Chaos, looking at what it spawned, perhaps wondering if this whole existence thing was really such a good idea after all. Spoiler alert, it's about to get very complicated. But that's a story for the next chapter. Chapter 2. The first children, monsters, and titans. So Gaia and Eratos kept doing their thing, and pretty soon the kids started arriving. And when I say kids, I mean the original divine family, the beings who would shape the cosmos before the Olympian gods were even a twinkle in fate's eye. First came the Titans, 12 of them, the original dozen, and let me tell you, naming 12 kids takes commitment. There was Oceanus, the eldest, who would become the great world-encircling river. Imagine all the oceans you know. Then imagine them as one massive guy with a beard made of seaweed and a temper like a riptide. Coeus, the titan of intellect, and the axis of heaven, basically the cosmic question mark, always wondering about the big stuff. Creus, master of the heavenly constellations, not the friendliest guy, but great at navigation. Hyperion, the lightbringer, who blazed with the fire of the sun before the sun even existed. His name literally means, he who goes above, and, yeah, he was a bit full of himself. Iapetus, the titan of mortality, and the eventual father of Prometheus. Remember that name Prometheus is going to be important later. And then there was Kronos, the youngest of the brothers. Cunning, ambitious, and patient in a way that should have been a warning sign to everyone. He's going to be the star of this show, but not in a good way. On the female side, you had Thea, titaness of sight, and the shining light of the clear blue sky. Gorgeous, radiant, and probably the most photogenic of the bunch. Rhea, who would become the mother of gods. She doesn't know it yet, but she's got a rough few millennia ahead of her. Themis, the embodiment of divine law and order. If the cosmos had a legal system, she was the Supreme Court. Mnemosyne, memory itself. Every story ever told, every moment ever remembered, that was her department. Phoebe, the bright and prophetic one, who could see things before they happened, which, honestly, must have been exhausting. And finally Tethys, the nursing mother of rivers and fresh water, who paired up with Oceanus to create basically every river spirit you've ever heard of. 12 titans, 12 cosmic forces. And for a while there, things were actually pretty great. They spread across the world, each taking their domain, each contributing to the structure of reality. The universe was coming together nicely. But then came the others. After the Titans, Gaia and Eranos had 3 more sons, the Cyclopes. And this is where Eranos started having some concerns about his parenting choices. The Cyclopes weren't like the Titans. They were massive, hulking giants with a single eye right in the middle of their foreheads. Their names were Brontes, Steropes, and Arge's thunder, lightning, and brightness. These guys were master craftsmen, able to forge anything from raw cosmic materials. In another age, they'd forge weapons that would change everything. But right now, they were just Eranos' weird kids who made him uncomfortable at family dinners. One eye, right in the middle of the face. Yeah, Eranos wasn't thrilled about how that turned out. But then came the final 3, the ones that made the Cyclopes look like cute puppies by comparison. The Hecatonchires. Heka means 100. Chairs means hands. You do the math. Codus, Briareus, and Gyges, 3 brothers, each with 100 arms sprouting from their shoulders and 50 heads growing from their necks. Imagine trying to hug one of them. Imagine trying to buy them shirts. Imagine the noise at breakfast when all 50 heads are talking at once. They were powerful beyond measure, strong enough to move mountains with a casual gesture, capable of throwing 100 boulders simultaneously. If you needed someone to multitask, these were your guys. If you needed someone to not give you absolute nightmares, maybe look elsewhere. Eranos took one look at these 3 and basically had a divine panic attack. See, up until now, things had been beautiful, poetic. The Titans were majestic and terrible in the best ways. But the Cyclopes, the Hecatonchires, these were monsters, aberrations, things that offended Eranos' sense of aesthetic perfection. The sky couldn't stand to look at them. And this is where our story takes its first dark turn. The world at this point was still young, still being shaped. Mountains pushed up where none had been before. Seas carved themselves into Gaia's surface. The Titans walked the earth, organizing things, creating their own children, nymphs and spirits and strange minor gods. It was the age of first things, when everything was being invented for the first time. But above it all, Eranos grew more disgusted with his youngest children. The Cyclopes disturbed him, the Hecatonchires horrified him. Every time he descended to embrace Gaia, he'd see them there, and his revulsion grew. So he made a decision. A cruel one. A decision that would set everything else in motion, like the first domino in a line stretching across eternity. He decided to get rid of them. Not kill them. You can't really kill beings like this. But he could hide them, imprison them, stuff them somewhere he'd never have to see them again. And he knew just the place. Eranos took his 3 Cyclope sons and his 3 Hecatonchire sons, and he shoved them back into Gaia's womb. Not reborn imprisoned. pushed them down into the darkest depths of the earth, into the caverns and hollows of his wife's body, where they couldn't defend his eyes anymore. Imagine that. Imagine being Gaia, feeling your own children, however monstrous, being forced back inside you, trapped in your depths, crying out in the darkness where no one can hear them. The pain was incredible. The weight of them pressed against her insides. The injustice of it burned like fire in her core. And that's when Gaia started getting angry. Really angry. Kronos kept coming to her, night after night, covering her completely so their imprisoned children couldn't escape. He was tyrant and jailer, father and oppressor, all at once. What had started as cosmic love had become something twisted and cruel. The Titans saw this. They understood what their father had become, but most of them said nothing. What could they do against the sky itself? Most of them said nothing. But Kronos, the youngest, the cleverest, the most ambitious, Kronos was paying attention, and he was starting to get ideas, dark ideas. Ideas involving that adamantine sickle his mother was about to offer him. Chapter 3, The Castration of Heaven, Kronos' Rebellion. Gaia was done. Completely, utterly, cosmically done with her husband's nonsense. 6 of her children were trapped inside her, crying out in darkness, their 100 hands and 50 heads and single eyes all pressed into the deepest parts of her being. The pain was constant. Not just physical, though having 6 enormous divine beings stuffed into your internal caverns definitely counts as physical pain, but emotional. Spiritual. The kind of pain that transforms you. She tried talking to Kronos. That went nowhere. The sky just kept descending each night, covering her completely, keeping the prisoners trapped, acting like everything was fine. Like he hadn't just committed the first act of cosmic injustice the universe had ever seen. So Gaia did what any self-respecting primordial goddess would do. She called a family meeting. She gathered her 12 Titan children and laid it out plainly. Your father, she said, and you could probably hear the venom in that word from 3 dimensions away, has become a tyrant. He's imprisoned your brothers in my depths. He causes me endless suffering, and he's never going to stop unless someone stops him. The Titans shifted uncomfortably. This was heavy stuff. Sure, Dad was being a total nightmare, but he was also, the sky. Kind of hard to fight against literally everything above you. I need one of you, Gaia continued, to help me, to punish him, to end his reign. Silence. The kind of silence that gets really awkward really fast. None of them wanted to volunteer. Standing up to your dad is hard enough when he's a regular person. When he's the living embodiment of the heavens, yeah, that's a whole other level of family drama. But then Kronos stepped forward. The youngest son, the one everyone probably underestimated. He looked at his mother and said simply, I'll do it. Maybe he was brave. Maybe he was ambitious. Maybe he saw an opportunity to take power for himself. Probably all 3, if we're being honest. The thing about Kronos is that he was complicated, capable of genuine feeling, but also ruthlessly calculating. He loved his mother, sure, but he also wouldn't mind being king of the universe. Gaia smiled. Not a nice smile. A smile of revenge and justice and pain about to be repaid. From her own substance, from the gray flint deep in her body, she forged a weapon. An adamantine sickle. Adamantine being the mythical, unbreakable metal that predates iron and bronze and everything else. This wasn't a farming tool. This was a weapon of cosmic violence, sharp enough to cut through divine flesh, strong enough to harm an immortal. She handed it to Kronos, and together they made a plan. Kronos came down, vast and star-filled, completely unaware. He stretched himself across Gaia, covering her entirely, presumably thinking about how great it was to be the sky, and how he didn't have to look at those ugly kids anymore. He had no idea what was coming. Kronos reached out from his hiding place. The adamantine sickle flashed in the primordial darkness, and in one swift, terrible motion, he castrated his father. Yeah, we're talking about that kind of violence. The scream that Kronos let out probably echoed across the entire cosmos. It was the first time anything that powerful had ever felt pain, and it was not handling it well. He recoiled, pulling away from Gaia for the first time in ages, retreating into the upper atmosphere, wounded and humiliated, and never to descend and cover the earth so completely again. But the story doesn't end there, because in Greek mythology, divine body parts don't just disappear. They have consequences. Kronos threw his father's severed genitals aside with disgust. Some say into the sea, some say onto the land. Either way, divine ichor and blood scattered everywhere, and from that blood came new life. Violent, angry life. Where the blood hit the earth, the Furies were born. The Erinyes. 3 sisters, Alecto, Megara, and Tisiphone, spirits of vengeance who would forever after punish crimes against family and kinship. Born from the first act of violence between father and son, they would spend eternity making sure such crimes didn't go unpunished. The irony is pretty thick there. The giants also rose from that blood-massive, powerful warriors who would one day cause their own problems for the gods. They were born from violence, and they carried that violence in their blood. And where the genitals fell into the sea, because, yes, this story goes there, the foam mixed with the divine essence, and from it rose Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Born from the castration of the sky, born from an act of supreme violence, the Greeks really understood that love and violence are sometimes just two sides of the same coin. Kronos barely listened. He'd won. His father was broken, his mother was free, and the imprisoned siblings, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, could now be. Actually, about that, here's where Kronos made his first big mistake. His first sign that maybe he wasn't the hero of the story after all. He didn't free his brothers. He left them exactly where Kronos had imprisoned them. Why? Maybe he feared their power. Maybe he didn't want competition. Maybe he looked at them and felt the same disgust his father had felt. Whatever the reason, the 6 siblings stayed trapped, waiting in the dark, waiting for someone else to free them, someone who would actually keep his promises. But for now, Kronos didn't care. The other Titans crowned him king. The age of Kronos was over. The age of Kronos had begun. The golden age was starting. Seemed. That curse, though, that prophecy about children overthrowing their father, that was ticking away like a time bomb, and Kronos had just inherited the timer. Chapter 4. The Golden Age and Its Shadows. Let's be real for a guy who started his reign by violently overthrowing his father with a gardening tool. Kronos actually did a pretty decent job as king of the universe. The Golden Age, they called it. And it wasn't just propaganda, it was genuinely golden. Under Kronos' rule, the world flourished in ways it never had before. Mortals who had started appearing on the earth at some point, as mortals do, lived in a state that can only be described as paradise. There was no war, no famine, no disease. The earth gave up her fruits without anyone having to work for them. You wanted grapes. They just grew. Needed grain? It appeared. Housing? The weather was so mild you barely needed it. People didn't age the way they do now. They lived long, happy lives, and then just kind of peacefully faded away, like falling asleep after a really good day. Death wasn't this terrible thing full of pain and fear. It was just the next step. No big deal. The Titans spread out across creation, each taking their domain and running it like the cosmic forces they were. It was the first time the universe had actual management structure, and honestly, it worked pretty well. Oceanus kept the waters flowing, creating rivers and streams with his wife Tethys. Together they had about 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, which seems excessive, but who's counting? Hyperion and his sister wife Thea produced Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn. Suddenly the world had a day-night cycle, which was a significant improvement over the previous eternal weird twilight situation. Coeus and Phoebe gave birth to Leto and Asteria, who would become important. Later family trees in Greek mythology get complicated fast, so just file that away for future reference. Iapetus fathered Atlas, Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Menoetius. Remember these names, especially Prometheus. That guy's going to be a problem for everyone involved, but in the most helpful way possible. And then there was Kronos himself, now firmly established as the Lord of Time, the Harvest, and basically everything that mattered. He held court on Mount Olympus. This was before Olympus became the hot new divine real estate, and the other Titans paid him homage. He was the king, the boss, the guy who defeated the sky itself. For his queen, Kronos chose his sister Rhea. And before you get weird about the sibling marriage thing, remember, these are primordial cosmic forces. The gene pool is limited, the rules are different, just roll with it. Rhea was nurturing, maternal, and everything a queen should be. She balanced out Kronos' harsher edges. Where he was time that consumes all things, she was the eternal flow that brings things forth. They were actually a pretty good match, at least at first. The marriage was celebrated across creation. The Golden Age had its king and queen. Everything was perfect. Everything was perfect. Everything was. You see where this is going, right? Because Kronos couldn't forget. No matter how well things were going, no matter how stable his reign, he couldn't forget his father's final words. That curse, that prophecy. Your own children will overthrow you. At first he brushed it off. Kronos was a bitter, defeated tyrant. Of course he'd say something spiteful on his way out. It didn't mean anything. Prophecies were just words. The future wasn't written. Except in Greek mythology, the future kind of is written. Prophecies aren't suggestions, they're inevitabilities. The more you try to avoid them, the more you guarantee they'll come true. It's like the universe's most frustrating prank. Kronos started having trouble sleeping, metaphorically speaking, since gods don't really sleep. But he'd sit on his throne, looking out over his perfect kingdom, and the doubt would creep in. What if his father was right? What if one of his own children would do to him what he'd done to Kronos? He remembered how easy it had been. One moment of vulnerability, one hidden sickle, one quick motion, and an entire cosmic order had changed. He'd been the youngest son, the unexpected one, the one nobody saw coming. What if his own youngest child was just as clever, just as ambitious, just as willing to do whatever it took to seize power? The paranoia started small, little thoughts, tiny worries. But paranoia is like a seed in fertile soil. It grows and keeps growing until it chokes out everything else. Kronos began to change. The liberator who'd freed his mother from suffering started to resemble the tyrant he'd overthrown. He became suspicious, controlling. His temper, which had always been there, got shorter. His mercy, which had never been his strongest quality, got thinner. The other Titans noticed but said nothing. You don't exactly tell the guy who castrated the sky that he's acting paranoid. Rhea noticed too, but she loved him. She believed this was just a phase. The stress of ruling the cosmos, that's all. He'd get over it. She was wrong. One day or night, or whatever you call the passage of time, when time itself is your husband, someone delivered a prophecy to Kronos. The sources differ on who exactly. Some say Gaia herself, finally paying back her son for leaving the Cyclopes and Hecatontures imprisoned. Some say it was an oracle, one of those mystic types who can see the pattern of fate. Some say Uranos' curse just kept echoing in his head until it became its own truth. But however it happened, the message was clear. One of your children will overthrow you, just as you overthrew your father. The cycle continues, the sun rises, the father falls. Kronos sat on his throne, the weight of certainty pressing down on him like the sky he'd separated from the earth. He had a choice. He could accept fate, let his children grow, hope that love and good parenting would break the cycle, trust that he could be different from Uranos. Or he could do something about it. Something terrible. Something that would ensure no child of his would ever grow strong enough to challenge him. And Kronos, for all his good qualities, for all the prosperity of his golden age, made the wrong choice. He looked at the future, at the prophecy that said his children would destroy him, and he decided to destroy them first. Well, not destroy exactly. Immortals can't really be destroyed, but they can be contained. They can be imprisoned. They can be swallowed whole and kept alive in darkness, unable to grow, unable to threaten, unable to fulfill any prophecies about patricide and revolution. Rhea was pregnant with their first child. She was glowing with joy, already imagining the baby, already planning nurseries and names and all the things new mothers think about. She had no idea what her husband was planning. No idea at all. The Golden Age was about to get a lot darker. Chapter 5. The Devouring Father. Rhea's pregnancy was everything a first pregnancy should be. Joyful, hopeful, full of that excited energy that comes with creating new life. She talked to her belly, telling the growing child about the world they'd inherit. About the mountains and the seas, the dawn and the dusk, the incredible golden age they were lucky enough to be born into. She'd imagine what the baby would look like. Would they have her eyes? Kronos' determination? Maybe they'd be gentle and kind, a new generation to make the world even better. Kronos watched all this with a frozen smile, said the right things, touched her belly at the appropriate moments, acted like the expectant father he was supposed to be. But inside, the prophecy was eating him alive. Your children will overthrow you. One of them. Maybe all of them. It didn't matter which. What mattered was stopping it. When Rhea went into labor, it was a cosmic event. The earth trembled not violently, but in sympathy with Gaia's granddaughter bringing forth new divine life. The Titans gathered. This was huge. The first child of the new generation. The first grandchild of Gaia and Uranos, who wasn't, a monster or imprisoned in the earth's depths. The baby was a girl. Beautiful. Perfect. Crying with healthy divine lungs. They named her Hestia. Rhea held her daughter, tears streaming down her face, completely overwhelmed with love. That immediate, fierce, protective love that mothers feel. She looked at Kronos, expecting to see the same joy reflected in his face. Instead, she saw something else. Something cold. Let me hold her, Kronos said. Rhea, exhausted and happy, handed over their daughter. Finally, she thought. Finally he'd feel what she felt. That instant connection, that overwhelming. Kronos opened his mouth and swallowed his daughter whole. Not chewed, not killed. Just opened up and down she went, disappearing into the darkness of her father's immortal gullet like she'd never existed at all. The room went silent. The kind of silence that happens when something so horrific occurs that reality itself needs a moment to process it. Rhea screamed, a sound of pure anguish that probably echoed across multiple dimensions. She lunged at Kronos, but he was the titan of time and strength. He held her back easily, his face expressionless. It's necessary, he said. Just that. Like he'd made a tough business decision instead of swallowing his own child. She's alive, he continued, as if that made it better. Immortals can't die. She's just contained, safe. She can't be hurt this way. Can't hurt anyone. Can't fulfill the prophecy, he didn't say. Can't overthrow me. Rhea collapsed. The other titans who'd witnessed this backed away slowly, looking at their king like he'd lost his mind. Which, to be fair, he kind of had. Paranoia and power are a toxic combination. But what could they do? He was Kronos. He'd overthrown the sky. He ruled time itself. You don't exactly stage an intervention when the guy can literally fast-forward you to dust. Inside Kronos, Hestia floated in divine darkness, conscious, aware, unable to grow, unable to escape, but alive, waiting. Rhea wanted to leave, wanted to run. But where do you go when your husband is king of the universe? Who do you tell? Who's going to stop him? So she stayed, and hoped. Hoped it was temporary insanity. Hoped he'd regret it. Hoped he'd somehow make this right. He didn't. When Rhea became pregnant again, because that's what happens with immortal marriages, she tried to hide it. Tried to pretend it wasn't happening, but you can't hide a pregnancy from the Titan who controls time. Kronos knew the moment of conception. The second child was born. Another girl. They named her Demeter, goddess of harvest and grain, of the growing things that sustain life. Rhea held her even tighter this time, pleaded with her husband, begged him to stop, reminded him of his own childhood, his own mother's suffering when Uranos imprisoned his siblings. "Don't you see?" she cried. "You're becoming him. You're becoming your father." Kronos hesitated. For just a moment, something human, or whatever counts as human for a Titan, flickered across his face. Doubt, shame, the recognition of what he was doing. Then he thought about the prophecy. About being overthrown. About losing everything he'd fought for, everything he'd built. He took Demeter from Rhea's arms, and swallowed her too. Down into the darkness. Down to join her sister. Two daughters now, floating in their father's divine stomach, alive but trapped, growing but never aging, aware but helpless. Rhea's grief turned to something harder. Something cold. But she was still trapped, still queen of a golden age that suddenly felt very tarnished. The third child was Hera. Regal even as an infant, destined to be queen of gods one day, didn't matter. Down she went. The fourth was a son. Hades, dark-haired, serious, with eyes like deep wells. The future lord of the underworld, though nobody knew it yet, swallowed. The fifth was another son, Poseidon. Wild, tempestuous, already radiating the power of storms and seas. Gone. 5 children, 5 swallowings. 5 times Rhea's heart broke a little more. The other Titans pretended not to notice. The Golden Age continued, though it felt different now, darker, like a beautiful garden with something rotten at its core. Inside Kronos, the 5 siblings huddled together in the divine darkness. They were conscious. They could think, feel, even communicate with each other in that strange way that trapped gods can. They knew their father had imprisoned them, knew their mother was powerless to save them. Knew they were growing slowly, weirdly, but growing in this suspended state between birth and life. And they were getting angry. Not the hot anger of a moment. The cold, patient anger of immortals who have nothing but time. The kind of anger that calculates, plans, waits for the perfect moment. They didn't know it yet, but they wouldn't be waiting alone for much longer. Rhea was pregnant again. 6th time. Last time if she had anything to say about it. This child, this final child, was going to be different. Because Rhea was done being helpless. Done watching her husband become the monster he'd once fought against. Done letting prophecy and paranoia destroy her family. She went to the only people who might understand. The only ones who'd suffered similarly under a tyrant's cruelty. She went to her parents. To Gaia, who'd been imprisoned by her own children within her body. To Uranos, distant but still watching from above, still bitter about that whole castration thing. And together, the 3 of them made a plan. A plan involving one more baby. One more trick. One more stone wrapped in blankets. One more chance to break the cycle. Or, more accurately, to continue it in a whole new direction. The war was coming. It just didn't know it yet. Chapter 6. The Stone Child. Zeus's birth. Rhea was 6 months pregnant when she made her decision. She'd sit on her throne next to Kronos, hands on her belly, feeling the baby kick. Strong kicks, powerful kicks. The kind that suggested this kid was going to be trouble in the best possible way, and she'd think, not this one. You're not taking this one. Kronos watched her like a hawk, or like a paranoid king who'd swallowed 5 children and was absolutely planning to make it 6. He counted the days, calculated when the birth would happen, made sure he'd be there, ready to continue his horrific tradition. But Rhea was done playing by his rules. She went to Gaia in secret, snuck away in the night, which is hard to do when your husband literally controls time, but Rhea was motivated. Mother Earth took one look at her daughter's desperate face and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." The plan was simple. Well, simple-ish. Definitely risky, but what choice did they have? When the time came for the birth, Rhea wouldn't stay at Mount Olympus where Kronos could watch her every move. She'd run, hide, give birth somewhere so remote, so protected, that even the King of Titans couldn't find her until it was too late. Gaia suggested Crete, specifically a cave on Mount Ida, or maybe it was the Dictaean cave, sources differ, but either way it was remote and hidden and perfect for a secret divine birth. The island itself would help protect the child. The whole place would conspire to keep the baby safe. When Rhea's labor started, she didn't tell Kronos, she just left. Slipped away in the middle of the night with Gaia's help, traveling faster than should have been possible, driven by that fierce maternal desperation that makes mothers capable of impossible things. By the time Kronos realized she was gone, she was already on Crete. The cave was dark and cool, lit only by the faint glow that divine beings give off naturally. Rhea labored alone well, not entirely alone. Gaia was there in spirit, the earth itself supporting her daughter-in-law. Some versions say nymphs attended her. Others say she was completely by herself, which honestly makes the whole thing even more intense. The pain was incredible. Divine births aren't easy, especially when you're stressed about your husband eating your baby the moment you're done. But Rhea pushed through it, literally and figuratively, and finally, the baby came. A boy. Screaming, healthy, already radiating more power than any of his siblings had at birth. You could feel it in the air. This one was different. This one was going to change everything. She held him for a moment. Just a moment. Let herself feel the joy she'd been denied 5 times before. Looked into his eyes, storm gray, fierce, already alert in that unsettling way divine babies are, and whispered, "Zeus." It means bright sky or daylight. Ironic, considering his father had separated the sky and earth. Poetic, considering what he was destined to do. But there was no time for bonding. Kronos would be looking for her. Would be tearing apart creation trying to find his wife and 6th child. They had to move fast. Rhea handed the baby to the nymphs, or to Gaia's servants, or to the cave itself, depending on which version you believe. "Keep him safe," she said. "Raise him strong, and whatever you do, don't let Kronos find him." Then came the clever part. Gaia had prepared a stone. Not just any stone, a special one, roughly baby-sized, wrapped carefully in swaddling clothes. In the dim light, if you weren't looking too closely, it could pass for an infant, especially if that infant's father was expecting to immediately swallow it without really examining it first. Rhea took the stone baby, held it like it was precious, and headed back to Mount Olympus. Kronos was waiting, furious. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Where's the child?" Rhea, exhausted and playing the part of defeated wife, held out the bundle. "Here," she said, her voice flat. "Another one for your collection." She didn't beg this time, didn't plead. That would have been suspicious. She just acted broken, like the fight had finally gone out of her after 5 swallowed children, like she'd accepted this was just how things were now. Kronos took the bundle, looked at it briefly or didn't look at all. Accounts vary. The thing about paranoia is that it makes you sloppy. You're so focused on the threat you're trying to prevent that you don't notice the details. You're so certain you know what's happening that you don't question it. He opened his mouth, swallowed the stone whole. And Rhea watched, keeping her face carefully neutral, as her husband consumed a rock wrapped in blankets, while her actual son was hidden in a cave on Crete, very much alive and very much not in anyone's stomach. Kronos felt satisfied. 6 children, 6 swallowings. The prophecy was contained. He was safe. His reign would continue forever, unmarred by patricide or rebellion. He had no idea he'd just been completely played. Back in Crete, baby Zeus was crying. Loud, healthy, divine baby cries that could probably be heard for miles if someone was listening, which was a problem because if Kronos heard those cries, the whole plan would fall apart. Enter the Curetes. These were Cretan warriors, or maybe minor gods, or maybe both. Greek mythology isn't always clear on job descriptions. What matters is that they came to the cave, and they had a plan for the noise problem. Whenever Zeus cried, they'd dance. Wild, frenzied dances around the cave entrance, clashing their spears against their shields, creating such a racket that the baby's cries were completely drowned out. Picture it. A bunch of armored guys doing the world's most aggressive, interpretive dance routine just to hide the fact that there's an infant god nearby. It sounds ridiculous. It worked perfectly. For his nurse, Zeus had Amalthea, most commonly described as a goat, a magical goat, but still a goat. Some versions say she was a nymph who owned a goat. Either way, Zeus was raised on goat's milk, which apparently makes you grow up to be king of the gods, so maybe we've all been underestimating dairy. The goat became so important to Zeus that later, much later, he'd honor her. One version says he used her hide to make his famous aegis, that shield cloak thing he's always depicted with. Another says he placed her among the stars as Capricorn. Either way, never let anyone tell you goats aren't crucial to Greek mythology. Zeus grew up in that cave, hidden from his father, raised by nymphs and nature spirits and one very special goat. He grew fast, gods do. Not overnight, but faster than mortals. Within a few years he was already a young man, strong and clever, learning about the world from the beings who protected him. And they told him everything, about his father, about his siblings, trapped inside Kronos' stomach, about the prophecy, about what he was meant to do. They told him he was destined to overthrow the king of Titans. And Zeus listened, learned, planned, trained, got stronger. He looked up at the sky sometimes, at the realm his father controlled, and he thought about what was coming. The confrontation, the liberation, the war that would reshape creation itself. He thought about his siblings, waiting in darkness, growing slowly inside their father's body. They'd waited long enough. It was almost time. Chapter 7. The Return and the Poison. Zeus was fully grown now. And when I say fully grown, I mean he'd gone from hidden baby to cosmic powerhouse in what felt like no time at all. That's the thing about gods. They don't mess around with awkward teenage phases. One day you're drinking goat milk in a cave. The next you're 6 feet of divine muscle with lightning crackling in your fingertips. He knew everything. The nymphs had made sure of that. They told him about Kronos' paranoia, about the 5 siblings trapped inside their father, about the prophecy that had started this whole mess. They trained him, taught him, prepared him for what had to come next. But Zeus wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't just march up to Mount Olympus and challenge his father to single combat. Kronos was the king of Titans, master of time itself, a guy who'd literally castrated the sky. You don't just walk up to that kind of power and start throwing punches. He needed a plan, a good one, something clever. So Zeus went looking for the smartest person he could find. Her name was Metis. She was an Oceanid, one of those 3,000 daughters of Oceanus and Tethys, which meant she was technically Zeus's cousin. But again, family trees in Greek mythology are more like family wreaths that loop back on themselves, so don't think too hard about it. Metis was the personification of cunning intelligence, not just smart-wise, strategic. The kind of person who could see 12 moves ahead in any situation. Her name literally meant wisdom or craft, and she lived up to it. Zeus found her by one of her father's streams, probably looking very mysterious and contemplative in that way that wisdom goddesses do. "I need your help," Zeus said, after introducing himself and explaining the whole hidden son of Kronos situation. Metis looked at him with those sharp, calculating eyes. "You want to free your siblings?" "Yes. And eventually overthrow your father." "That's the plan." "Good," she said, smiling. "I thought you'd never ask." Turns out, Metis had her own issues with Kronos. The Titans weren't exactly popular with everyone in creation. Their rule was stable, sure, but it was also rigid. Controlling. The old generation holding on to power while the new generation waited for their turn. A lot of minor gods and spirits were ready for a change. Together, Zeus and Metis worked out the details. The plan had to be perfect. They'd get exactly one shot at this, and if they messed it up, Zeus would probably end up as child number 6 in Kronos' stomach, stone or no stone. "We don't start with war," Metis said. "We start with trickery. Get your siblings out first, then you'll have allies. Then you can think about the whole cosmic rebellion thing." She began working on a potion, something that would make Kronos violently sick enough to vomit up everything he'd swallowed. The recipe varied depending on who you asked. Some said it was mustard mixed with wine. Others claimed it was nectar laced with special herbs that Gaia provided. Maybe it was both. Maybe Metis just threw everything she could think of into a cup and hoped for the best. Whatever it was, it needed to be strong enough to affect a Titan, but subtle enough that Kronos wouldn't taste the trap. The next part of the plan was risky. Zeus had to get close to his father, close enough to serve him a drink, close enough that Kronos wouldn't suspect anything. So Zeus disguised himself. Not magically, he didn't have that kind of power yet, but he made himself look like a young cupbearer, just another servant in the halls of Mount Olympus. Knew enough that Kronos wouldn't recognize him, harmless enough that the guards wouldn't question him. He walked into his father's stronghold carrying the potion in a golden cup, his heart probably beating like thunder even though he kept his face calm. This was it, the moment everything either worked or fell spectacularly apart. The throne room of Mount Olympus was impressive in that oppressive, totalitarian kind of way, all cold stone and sharp angles, designed to make you feel small. Kronos sat on his throne, looking exactly like what he was, a king who'd held power so long he couldn't imagine losing it. He was in a good mood that day, or maybe just distracted. Either way, when a young cupbearer approached with wine, he barely glanced up. Zeus knelt, offered the cup, kept his eyes down in the submissive way servants do. "My lord," he said, his voice steady, "finest wine from your stores." Kronos took the cup without really looking at the person holding it. Why would he? He was the king of Titans. He'd swallowed 6 children. He'd defeated the sky. He was invincible. He drank. The potion hit his system immediately. For a second, nothing happened. Zeus stayed kneeling, head down, probably praying to whatever force primordial gods pray to that this was going to work. Then Kronos' eyes went wide. His hand clutched at his stomach. The cup clattered to the floor. "What?" he started to say, but then the convulsions began. It wasn't pretty. Divine vomit never is. But it was effective. Kronos lurched forward, his whole body heaving, and suddenly he was throwing up things that shouldn't be able to be thrown up. Solid things, living things, things that had been inside him for years. First came the stone. The fake baby Zeus, wrapped in now ancient swaddling clothes, hitting the floor with a heavy thunk. Kronos stared at it in confusion. Why was there a rock in his stomach? But he didn't have time to figure it out because the heaving continued. Then came Poseidon, the god of the sea, emerged fully grown, gasping and disoriented, but very much alive. He looked around, saw his father doubled over, saw the young cupbearer backing away, and immediately understood something significant was happening. Then Hades, dark and serious, materializing from Kronos' throat like death itself. Then Hera, regal even covered in divine stomach acid, her eyes blazing with fury. Then Demeter, touching the ground and immediately causing grain to sprout because even traumatic rebirth can't stop a nature goddess from doing her thing. And finally, Hestia, the eldest, the first to be swallowed, and now the last to emerge, steady and calm despite everything. 5 gods, fully grown, standing in their father's throne room, staring at the Titan who'd imprisoned them, and Kronos, still reeling from the potion, looked up at his children, his prophecy fulfilling, father overthrowing children, and realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The stone had been a decoy. Zeus was alive. His children were free. The prophecy was coming true. Zeus dropped the disguise, stood tall, looked his father in the eye for the first time. "Hello, father," he said. "We need to talk." The room went very, very quiet, and somewhere in the distance, you could almost hear the sound of war drums beginning to beat. Chapter 8. Choosing Sides. The World Divides. The throne room of Mount Olympus had never been so tense. You could have cut the atmosphere with Kronos' old adamantine sickle, which, incidentally, was probably somewhere nearby, getting very nervous about being used again. 5 gods, newly freed, dripping with whatever immortal digestive fluids Titans have, staring at their father. 1 Titan king, still recovering from the worst case of food poisoning in cosmic history, staring at his children. And Zeus, standing between them, literally the personification of, "I told you so." Kronos was the first to break the silence. "How?" His voice was hoarse, confused. He looked at the stone on the floor, then back at Zeus, then at his other children. "You were supposed to be?" "Swallowed?" Zeus finished. "Yeah, about that. Mom's smarter than you gave her credit for." You could see the realization dawning on Kronos' face. The deception, the years of thinking he was safe, the stone he'd swallowed without questioning, all of it crashing down at once. His expression shifted from confusion to rage. Time itself seemed to flicker around him, things aging and the aging in rapid succession, the very air growing heavy with temporal distortion. This was Kronos' power, and he was about to use it. But Zeus raised his hand, and lightning crackled between his fingers. Not a lot he was still learning, but enough to make a point. "We're leaving," Zeus said calmly. "All of us. You can try to stop us, or you can let us walk out. Either way, we're done being your prisoners." Poseidon stepped forward, water beginning to swirl around his feet. Hades faded slightly, testing his power over shadows. The sisters stood firm, united. Kronos could have fought them right then, probably should have. But he was still weak from the potion, still disoriented, and honestly probably still processing the fact that his wife had successfully pranked him with a rock. The siblings walked out, just like that, past the guards who didn't dare stop them, past the other Titans who watched in stunned silence, out of Mount Olympus and into the world. And that's when Zeus made his proclamation. Standing on a mountain peak, lightning gathering in the clouds above him, Zeus's voice echoed across creation. Kronos is a tyrant. He imprisoned his siblings. He devoured his children. His reign is over. I am declaring war. Subtle, he was not. The shock wave of that declaration rippled across the cosmos. Every god, every titan, every spirit and nymph and minor deity suddenly had to make a choice. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was civil war on a cosmic scale. The Titans gathered at Mount Olympus for an emergency council. 12 of them, well, 11, since Oceanus was notably absent trying to figure out what to do about this rebellion. Most sided with Kronos immediately. Not necessarily because they loved him, some did, some didn't, but because he was the established order. The king. The guy who'd been in charge for ages. You don't just throw away stability because some kid shows up claiming to be the rightful heir. Atlas, Kronos' nephew, was perhaps the most vocal supporter. Strong, proud, and absolutely convinced that the younger generation needed to learn their place. He'd lead the Titan forces in battle, and he'd do it enthusiastically. Hyperion stood with Kronos too. The sun-bright Titan wasn't about to let some storm god take over the cosmos. Iapetus, Koios, Krios. They all fell in line. Family loyalty, political calculation, or just fear of what would happen if they didn't. The reasons varied, but the result was the same. But not everyone chose the Titan's side. Oceanus, the eldest, stayed neutral. He'd seen too much, lived too long to get involved in another family war. He'd keep his rivers flowing and his oceans moving, and whoever won could come talk to him afterward. Switzerland had nothing on Oceanus's commitment to neutrality. And then there was Prometheus, son of Iapetus, nephew of Kronos, and quite possibly the smartest being in creation. Prometheus could see the future not perfectly, but better than most. He looked at Zeus and saw potential. He looked at Kronos and saw a king whose time was ending. So Prometheus made a choice that would define him forever. He approached Zeus. "I'll help you," he said simply, "but not just with war, with strategy, with foresight, with the things you'll need to actually win." Zeus, being young and not stupid, accepted immediately. Having the smart cousin on your side is always a good move. Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, came along too, mostly because Prometheus told him to, and Epimetheus, whose name literally means afterthought, wasn't great at making his own decisions. But hey, another ally is another ally. Some of the Oceanids sided with Zeus, Métis, obviously, but others too. Younger gods who wanted change, nature spirits tired of Titan rule. Various minor deities who figured they had better chances with the new regime. But Zeus knew it wasn't enough. He had 5 siblings, 2 Titans, and a handful of allies against 11 Titans and all their supporters. The math wasn't great. That's when Prometheus said, "You know who you really need? The ones Kronos and Uranos both imprisoned." Zeus looked at him. "The Cyclopes and Hecatontures." "Exactly." So Zeus made a journey. Down, down, down into the depths of the earth, following paths that barely existed, descending into darkness so complete that even divine eyes struggled to see. He reached Tartarus. The prison was everything the stories said. Bronze gates sealed tight, darkness so thick you could feel it. And behind those gates, the 6 brothers who'd been trapped since the beginning of time. Zeus broke the seals, tore open the gates. Light flooded in for the first time in forever. The 3 Cyclopes emerged, first Brontes, Steropes, and Argus, blinking their single eyes, huge and terrible and free for the first time since Uranos had imprisoned them. "You freed us," Brontes said, his voice like grinding stone. "I'm freeing everyone my father and grandfather wronged," Zeus replied. "But I won't lie, I need your help. There's a war coming." The Cyclopes looked at each other. Then Brontes smiled. "We're master craftsmen, we can help with that." They got to work immediately, using skills honed over eternities of imprisonment. Their hands moved faster than seemed possible, shaping divine metals, channeling cosmic forces. For Zeus, they forged a thunderbolt. Not just lightning, concentrated celestial fury that could split mountains and shake the heavens. The ultimate weapon of the sky. For Poseidon, a trident. 3-pronged, capable of commanding all waters, creating earthquakes with a single strike, stirring storms from calm seas. For Hades, a helm of invisibility. Darkness itself woven into a crown that would make its wearer unseen, unheard, undetectable. 3 weapons, 3 brothers, the great equalizers. Then Zeus freed the Hecatontures Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. The 100-handed giants emerged, and even Zeus took a step back. They were massive, terrifying. Each of their 50 heads looking in different directions, each of their 100 hands flexing with power. "Join us," Zeus said. "Help us overthrow the ones who imprisoned you." The 3 brothers didn't need to discuss it. They'd had eons to think about revenge. "Yes," they said in unison, 150 voices speaking as one. Both sides were gathering their forces now. On Mount Olympus, the Titans prepared for war. On Mount Olympus, a newer, taller peak that the younger gods had claimed as their base, Zeus and his allies did the same. The world itself seemed to be holding its breath. Mortals hid in their homes, sensing something vast and terrible approaching. Animals fled to deep caves. The very air crackled with anticipation. 2 generations of gods, facing each other across the landscape. The old order versus the new. Father versus son. The Titanomachy was about to begin, and it was going to be absolutely catastrophic. Chapter 9. The First Clashes. Thunder meets earth. The first blow of the war wasn't struck with a weapon. It was struck with a challenge. Zeus stood at the base of Mount Olympus, his newly forged thunderbolt crackling in his hand, and he shouted up at the Titan stronghold, "Kronos, come face what you created." The response was immediate. The sky darkened not with Zeus's storm clouds, but with something else. Something older. Time itself seemed to slow and stutter, like reality was buffering. That was Kronos' power, and he was done hiding. The king of Titans emerged from his fortress, and he looked every bit the cosmic force he was. Tall, imposing, carrying a scythe that had once cut the sky itself. His eyes burned with rage and something else, betrayal maybe. The pain of a father who tried to prevent a prophecy and ended up guaranteeing it. "You should have stayed swallowed," Kronos said. "You should have been a better father," Zeus shot back. And just like that, the war began. Zeus hurled his first thunderbolt. It streaked across the sky like a screaming comet, striking the ground near Kronos' feet and leaving a crater of molten rock. The sound was deafening, not just noise, but the sound of the air itself being torn apart. Kronos retaliated by swinging his scythe in a wide arc. Where it passed, things aged rapidly. Trees grew and died in seconds. Rocks crumbled to dust. The very ground withered. This was the power of time and harvest. Everything eventually falls to the reaper. Poseidon raised his trident and the seas responded. Massive waves rose from the distant ocean, climbing impossible heights, crashing toward the Titan lines with enough force to reshape coastlines. Water became a weapon, pressure, and weight, and drowning darkness. Hyperion countered with solar fire. The Titan of light blazed like a second sun, heat washing over everything, evaporating Poseidon's waters before they could hit. The ground cracked from the temperature. The air shimmered. It was like fighting inside a furnace. Hades did what Hades does best, disappeared. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, his helm making him completely undetectable. He reappeared behind enemy lines, creating chaos, spreading fear. You can't fight what you can't see, and the Titans learned quickly that invisible death gods are absolutely terrifying in combat. Atlas charged forward, and when I say charged, I mean the ground shook with each step. He was massive even by Titan standards, strong enough to hold up the sky, which, spoiler alert, he was eventually going to have to do. He grabbed a boulder the size of a house and hurled it at the Olympians like it was a pebble. Hera blasted it apart mid-flight with a wave of divine energy. She might not have been the warrior her brothers were, but she was powerful in her own right and absolutely furious about the whole being swallowed for years thing. Rage is a great motivator. Demeter caused the earth itself to rebel. Roots erupted from the ground, massive and tough as steel, trying to entangle the Titans. Vines whipped through the air like angry snakes. The land itself became hostile territory. The Titans' response was coordinated and brutal. They'd been warriors and rulers for eons. They knew how to fight. Koios manipulated the stars, causing celestial energy to rain down like arrows. Krios brought the force of constellations to bear, cosmic weight pressing down on the Olympians. Iapetus moved with the inevitability of mortality itself. Whatever he touched began to fail, to weaken, to die. The battlefield was Mount Olympus and the plains surrounding it, but the effects rippled outward. Miles away, mortals felt the ground shake, seas boiled, mountains cracked. The sky flashed with lightning and darkened with temporal distortions. Reality itself was becoming a casualty of this war. Zeus and Kronos met in direct combat, and it was personal in a way the other fights weren't. Father and son, prophecy fulfilled, all the bitterness and betrayal and fear coming out in raw violence. Lightning versus time, thunder versus decay. Zeus struck fast, hurling bolt after bolt, each one capable of leveling a city. Kronos moved through time itself, aging the lightning mid-flight, making it dissipate before it hit. He'd slow time around Zeus, making him move like he was underwater, then strike with his scythe. Zeus learned to counter. He'd create temporal pockets with his own storm energy, little bubbles where time moved normally. He struck from multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming his father's defenses, but Kronos had experience, centuries of it. He knew how to fight, how to survive, how to make opponents age themselves to exhaustion. It was a stalemate. Neither could gain the advantage. Poseidon fought against Oceanus or tried to, but the eldest Titan had declared neutrality, so instead Poseidon clashed with the various water spirits who'd sided with the Titans. It was weird, fighting over control of the same element. Water attacking water, waves canceling each other out, whirlpools consuming whirlpools. The oceans themselves didn't know which master to follow. The war raged for days, then weeks, and nobody was winning. That was the thing about this conflict. Both sides were immortal. You couldn't kill a Titan, couldn't kill a god. You could hurt them, sure, wound them even gravely, but they'd heal, they'd get back up, they'd keep fighting. The world, however, wasn't immortal. Mountains were being leveled and reformed in different places. Geography was being rewritten with each clash. The island of Sicily? Some versions say it was a Titan thrown by Zeus. Various mountain ranges? The result of earth-shaking combat. The Mediterranean Sea? Possibly carved out by a particularly angry Poseidon. Mortals suffered. Their homes were destroyed. Their crops withered under Kronos' power, or burned under Hyperion's light, or drowned under Poseidon's waves. They huddled in caves and prayed to whichever gods might listen, not knowing that the gods were too busy fighting each other to pay attention. On the battlefield, warriors on both sides were starting to feel it. Not physical exhaustion, gods don't get tired like that, but spiritual weariness. The endless cycle of attack, defend, heal, repeat. The knowledge that this could go on forever if something didn't change. Zeus pulled back to the Olympian camp after one particularly brutal day of fighting. His siblings gathered around him. They all looked worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical damage. "We can't win like this," Poseidon said bluntly. "We're evenly matched. This could last centuries." "Millennia," Hades added darkly. Prometheus, who'd been watching the battles from a strategic distance, stepped forward. "You have allies you haven't used yet." Zeus knew what he meant. The Hecatonchires. The 100-headed giants who'd been freed but hadn't yet entered the battle. They'd been waiting, preparing, and now it was time. "Bring them," Zeus said. The message was sent. The Titans had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The war was about to escalate in a very significant way. Chapter 10. The Long War, 10 Years of Chaos. Time became meaningless during the Titanomachy, which is ironic considering one side was literally led by the personification of time itself. 10 years. The war lasted 10 years, though years is a loose term when reality itself keeps getting torn apart and reassembled. The mortals counted seasons, summer, winter, until they lost track. The gods just kept fighting. Day after day, battle after battle, an endless cycle of violence that reshaped the world with each clash. Zeus learned to fight during those 10 years. Really fight, not just throw lightning around and hope for the best, but actually strategize, use terrain, coordinate with his siblings. He went from angry son with a cool weapon to actual war leader, and the transformation wasn't pretty or easy. He faced Kronos dozens of times, maybe hundreds. Each confrontation was deeply personal: father trying to destroy son, son trying to overthrow father, both of them locked in the exact cycle they tried to prevent. One battle stands out in the stories. Zeus and Kronos met on a plateau that no longer exists. It got obliterated during the fight. They circled each other like predators, lightning crackling around Zeus, temporal distortions warping the air around Kronos. "You could end this," Kronos said. "Swear loyalty. Take a place at my side, you and your siblings." "Like you gave your brothers a place?" Zeus shot back. "The ones still rotting in Tartarus because you were too paranoid to free them?" "I freed you from non-existence," Kronos roared. "I gave you life." "You swallowed me," Zeus hurled a thunderbolt. "Well, you tried to. You've had a rock instead. How'd that taste, father?" The fight that followed was spectacular and terrible. Lightning scarred the earth. Time woods created and destroyed themselves. At one point, Zeus was simultaneously 20 years older and younger, existing in multiple temporal states, until he blasted his way back to normal. They fought to exhaustion, or what passes for exhaustion, among immortals, and separated without a victor. Again, Poseidon had his own recurring battles. He'd fight various Titan allies, turning coastlines into war zones. Entire seas would rise up and crash down, creating new bays and inlets. He learned to weaponize water in ways that would have been impossible before the war. Pressure, temperature, the sheer weight of ocean depths brought up to crush opponents. There's a story about him fighting one of Hyperion's suns. Poseidon called up a tsunami so large it blocked out the sun, then froze it midair and dropped it like a hammer. The Titan survived, but the crater is supposedly still visible in what's now the Aegean Sea. Hades operated differently. He'd disappear for weeks, then reappear having sabotaged Titan supply lines or stolen important artifacts, or just spread enough fear that Titan allies started deserting. He was waging psychological warfare while his brothers fought physically. The sisters held their own territories. Hera commanded forces, proving she was born to rule whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Demeter turned entire regions into fortresses of hostile plant life. Hestia maintained the home fires, quite literally. The Olympian camp always had warmth and food and stability because she made it so. On the Titan side, Atlas was becoming legendary. He'd fought Zeus to a standstill multiple times, held off Poseidon and Hades together, carried injured Titans off the battlefield on his shoulders. He was the champion of the old order, and he wore that responsibility like armor. Hyperion burned brighter as the war went on, like he was trying to prove the Titan's light wouldn't fade. His battles with Zeus were particularly destructive. Solar fire meeting lightning, creating storms of energy that cooked the ground to glass. But here's the thing about a 10-year war: people get tired, not physically, but mentally, spiritually. That fire that drives you on day 1 starts to dim by year 5. The Olympians would sit around their camp some nights, too worn out even for strategy sessions, just existing, processing, wondering if this would ever end. "We're fighting for the future," Zeus would say, trying to sound inspirational, "for a better world, for freedom from tyranny." "We're fighting because a prophecy said we would," Hades would reply, because Hades was always the pragmatic one. "Prophecies don't care about better worlds, they just are." "Then we make the better world happen anyway," Poseidon would add, out of spite, if nothing else. And they'd laugh, because what else could you do? You were fighting your father in a war that was reshaping reality. Either you laughed, or you went mad. Prometheus provided strategy. He'd stand on high ground watching battles, then come back with analysis. Atlas is overextending on the left flank. Hyperion's solar fire is weaker in the morning. Kronos keeps protecting his right side old wound there probably. It helped, but it wasn't enough to break the stalemate, because that's what it was. A stalemate. The Titans couldn't decisively beat the Olympians. The Olympians couldn't break through the Titan defenses. They just kept fighting, over and over, in an endless cycle that would have been poetic if it wasn't so exhausting. The world transformed around them. New mountains rose where old ones fell, rivers changed course, seas expanded. The map of creation was being redrawn in real time, and nobody was keeping track because everyone was too busy trying not to get obliterated. Some minor gods switched sides during those 10 years. Usually from Titans to Olympians, the younger generation was starting to look more appealing as the war dragged on. Fresh energy, new ideas, the promise of change instead of more of the same. But plenty stayed loyal to Kronos, out of genuine belief, or fear, or just because they'd invested too much to back out now. By year 8, even the most enthusiastic warriors were feeling it. The kind of deep weariness that comes from knowing you're in an unwinnable situation but being unable to stop. Zeus stood on Mount Olympus one night, looking out at the scarred landscape, and admitted what everyone was thinking. We need something different, something that changes the equation entirely. Prometheus nodded. You need overwhelming force, the kind that can't be countered or matched. The Hecatoncheires, Zeus said. The Hecatoncheires, Prometheus confirmed. They'd been held in reserve, partly because Zeus wasn't sure how to use them, partly because unleashing them felt like admitting you couldn't win on your own merits. But pride doesn't win wars, strategy does. It was time to stop fighting fair. It was time to bring in the 100-handed ones, and end this. The 10th year of the war was about to become the last. Chapter 11. The 100-handed ones unleashed. Zeus called a war council, not a casual strategy meeting, a full assembly of everyone fighting on the Olympian side. Gods, spirits, minor deities, anyone who'd thrown their lot in with the rebellion. They gathered on Mount Olympus, and you could feel the tension in the air. 10 years of war, 10 years of stalemate. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Something has to change. We're bringing in the Hecatoncheires, Zeus announced. The reaction was mixed. Some people nodded finally, something different. Others looked nervous. Because, yeah, the 100-handed giants were allies, technically, but they were also terrifying on a level that made the Cyclopes look cuddly. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges had been waiting at the edge of the Olympian camp, trying not to make everyone uncomfortable with their mere presence. Which is hard when you're the size of a mountain with 100 arms and 50 heads. Zeus approached them personally. We need you. Not just as allies as the deciding factor. Are you ready? The three brothers looked at each other with their collective 150 heads, having what was probably a very complicated silent conversation. Briareus spoke first, all 50 of his mouths moving in unsettling coordination. We've been ready since you freed us. We've been waiting for you to ask. You freed us from eternal darkness, Cottus added, his 100 hands flexing. We owe you everything, but more than that, we want this. Revenge against those who imprisoned us. Kronos left us to rot, Gyges said, and there was an ocean of bitterness in those words. Ouranos put us there, but Kronos kept us there. He could have freed us when he took power. He didn't. Zeus nodded. Then let's show him what a mistake that was. The next day, the Olympians assembled for battle as usual. The Titans lined up across the field, probably expecting another day of the same grinding conflict they'd been fighting for a decade. Then the Hecatoncheires walked onto the battlefield. The effect was immediate. The Titan lines actually stumbled backward. You could see the shock rippling through their ranks. Because seeing the Hecatoncheires from a distance is one thing. Having them walk toward you, each step shaking the ground, all those heads turning to look at you, all those hands reaching, that's completely different. They were massive, taller than any Titan. Their bodies were humanoid, but wrong in that way, that ancient primordial things are wrong. Each of their 100 arms was as thick as a tree trunk and proportionally strong. Each of their 50 heads looked different. Some bearded, some not, some with different expressions, like 50 different people had been merged into one entity. And they were angry. The kind of anger that comes from eons of imprisonment. The kind of anger that doesn't need rage or shouting. Just cold, focused, inevitable violence. Briareus reached down, all 100 hands reaching simultaneously, and picked up boulders. Not little rocks. Massive chunks of mountain, each one the size of a house. He held them casually, one per hand, 100 projectiles ready to fly. Cottus and Gyges did the same. 300 hands, 300 boulders. For our freedom, Briareus said. And they threw. Imagine getting hit by one boulder thrown by a giant. Now imagine 300 boulders, all thrown at once, all with the force of divine strength behind them. The sky literally darkened with stone. It was like a meteor shower, except the meteors were angry and targeted. The Titan front lines disintegrated. Not broke disintegrated, boulders crashed down with enough force to create craters. Titans were knocked flying. Defenses that had held for 10 years crumbled in seconds. And the hecatoncures didn't stop. They bent down, picked up more ammunition trees, rocks, pieces of broken mountain, whatever was available, and threw again, and again, and again. 300 hands working in perfect coordination, creating a continuous bombardment that couldn't be blocked or avoided. It was like fighting a natural disaster that specifically hated you. Atlas tried to rally the Titans. He charged forward, roaring defiance, probably thinking he could physically stop the giants. He was strong enough to hold up the sky, after all. Surely he could handle this. He couldn't. Briareus caught him with 50 hands at once, lifted him up, and threw him backward into the Titan lines like a bowling ball hitting pins. Atlas crashed through his own allies, creating a domino effect of destruction. Hyperion tried to burn them. He blazed with solar fire, becoming a miniature sun, heat washing over the battlefield. The hecatoncures just kept throwing. Their boulders passed through the flames, some of them actually on fire now, which just made them more terrifying. Kronos himself stepped forward, trying to use his time powers. He slowed the area around the hecatoncures, making their movements sluggish, making the boulders drift through the air like feathers. But here's the thing even slowed down. 300 hands throwing 300 boulders is still overwhelming. The math just works in their favor. And the hecatoncures had learned patience. They'd waited in Tartarus for eons. They could handle moving a bit slower. Zeus saw his opportunity. While the Titans were focused on the giant threat, he rallied his siblings. Now, while they're distracted, the Olympians surged forward. Lightning, earthquakes, invisible death, divine fury, all of it concentrated on the reeling Titan forces. It was the breakthrough they'd needed for 10 years. The Titan defense cracked. Actually cracked. Lines that had held firm for a decade suddenly had gaps, weaknesses. Titans retreating instead of holding ground. Kronos looked around at his crumbling army and realized something terrible. He was losing. Not just this battle. The war. The prophecy was fulfilling itself despite everything he'd done to prevent it. Every action he'd taken to avoid his fate had led him directly to it. The children he'd swallowed were overthrowing him. The siblings he'd left imprisoned were destroying his army. The sun he'd thought was safely consumed was calling down the sky itself on his head. It was all falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The tide had turned. The stalemate was broken. The end was coming. Chapter 12. The breaking point. Kronos falls. The Titan lines were collapsing. After 10 years of stalemate, the battlefield had turned into a rout in a matter of hours. The hecatoncures were an unstoppable force, and the Titans who thought they'd seen everything in a decade of war had no answer for them. But Kronos wasn't done. Not yet. The king of Titans stood at the summit of Mount Olympus, watching his army fall apart below him, and made a decision. If he was going down, he was taking Zeus with him. One final confrontation. Father versus son. The way it was always meant to be. He descended from his fortress, and where he walked, time itself shuddered. Plants aged and died. Rocks crumbled to dust. Even the immortals fighting nearby felt it, that creeping sensation of entropy, of everything falling toward its inevitable end. Zeus saw him coming. Of course he did. This was what the whole war had been building toward. Not strategy, not armies, not even the prophecy, really. Just this. Two beings who should have loved each other, meeting in violence because neither could find another way. The battlefield seemed to pause. Even in the chaos of war, everyone noticed when these two moved toward each other. Olympians and Titans alike backed away, creating a circle. This wasn't their fight. This was personal. They met in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by the wreckage of 10 years of war. It didn't have to be this way, Zeus said, not gloating, not angry, just stating a fact. Yes, it did, Kronos replied. His voice was tired. The prophecy said, what would happen, not what had to happen. You made the choices that led here. You swallowed your children. You became the tyrant. You fulfilled your own doom. Kronos' face twisted. I was trying to prevent it. You were trying to prevent change. There's a difference. And then they fought. Not like before, not like the dozens of skirmishes over the past decade. This was different, final. Both of them knew this was it. Whoever walked away from this fight would shape the future of creation. Zeus struck first, hurling a thunderbolt with everything he had. Not just electricity, pure celestial wrath, the anger of 10 years and a childhood spent hidden in a cave, and siblings swallowed, and a father who chose fear over love. The bolt hit Kronos square in the chest, and he staggered. Actually, he staggered. In 10 years of fighting, Zeus had never managed that before. Kronos retaliated with his scythe, swinging in wide arcs that aged everything they passed. Zeus dodged, barely, feeling time's pull trying to wither him. He was faster now than he'd been at the war's start. Stronger. More experienced. But Kronos was still Kronos, still the Titan who'd defeated the sky. He controlled time, and that meant he could see attacks before they happened, slow them down, age them until they dissipated. They traded blows. Thunder against decay, youth against age, the new order against the old. Zeus called down lightning continuously, creating a storm that turned day into night. Rain poured. Wind howled. The sky itself became a weapon, pressing down on Kronos with atmospheric pressure that would have crushed mountains. Kronos created temporal bubbles, little pockets where time moved differently. Zeus would throw a punch, and suddenly he'd be moving through molasses while Kronos moved normally. Or he'd age 50 years in a second, then snap back to normal as the effect ended. It was brutal. Reality bending. The kind of fight that shouldn't be possible but was happening anyway because gods don't follow normal rules. Around them, the war continued. Poseidon and Hades tag-teamed Atlas, finally bringing down the mighty Titan. The Hecaton shears systematically dismantled what remained of the Titan resistance. Hyperion was falling back, his light dimming. But the real battle was the one in the center. Everyone knew it. Zeus was bleeding ichor, the golden blood of gods from a dozen wounds. Kronos looked ancient in a way he never had before, like the weight of time was finally catching up to him. You can't win, Kronos gasped. Even if you defeat me, the cycle continues. Your children will overthrow you. That's how it works. Son against father, forever. Maybe, Zeus said, breathing hard. Or maybe I'll be different. Maybe I'll learn from your mistakes. You won't. Kronos laughed bitterly. I said the same thing about Uranus. In that moment of distraction, that split second of philosophical reflection, was all Zeus needed. He hid his father with everything he had left. Lightning, wind, rain, thunder, the full force of the storm. Not just physical power, but divine authority, the weight of destiny itself, the momentum of 10 years of war, and all those who'd suffered under Kronos' rule. The blast was visible from miles away, a pillar of light and sound that tore through the clouds. When it cleared, Kronos was on his knees. Not dead, you can't kill a Titan, but beaten, defeated, his scythe broken, his power spent, the king of Titans reduced to just another prisoner of fate. Zeus stood over his father, thunderbolt raised for a final strike. Around them, the battlefield had gone quiet. The war was ending. Everyone was watching. Yield, Zeus said. Kronos looked up at his son. In his eyes was defeat, yes, but also something else. Maybe relief. Maybe the acknowledgement that fighting prophecy had always been pointless. Maybe just exhaustion. I yield, he said quietly. The words echoed across the battlefield. The Titans who were still standing heard it. Their king had surrendered. The war was over. They'd lost. Atlas threw down his weapons. Hyperion's light extinguished. One by one, the Titans stopped fighting. Some fled. Some just stood there, stunned. The age that had lasted eons was ending right in front of them. Zeus looked around at the destroyed landscape, the defeated Titans, his exhausted siblings. They'd won. Actually won. But victory felt different than he'd imagined. Heavier. More complicated. Because now came the hard part. What to do with the defeated. How to build a new order. How to prove he was different from the tyrant he'd just overthrown. How to be a king instead of just a warrior. The storm clouds were clearing. The sun was breaking through for the first time in what felt like forever. A new age was dawning. Whether it would be better than the last one remained to be seen. Chapter 13, Tartarus, the prison of the defeated. Victory creates a problem that nobody talks about in the heroic songs. What do you do with the losers? The Titans were defeated, surrendered, kneeling in the wreckage of Mount Olympus, waiting to learn their fate. And Zeus, newly crowned king of the universe, still bleeding ichor from a dozen wounds, had to figure out what justice looked like when you've just overthrown your father. Execution wasn't an option. Immortals don't die. That's kind of their whole thing. You can wound them, imprison them, make them really uncomfortable for eternity, but you can't end them. Exile was tempting, but risky. Let them wander free, and they might regroup. Might start another war in a few centuries when everyone's guard was down. Might find new allies and try again. So Zeus made the same choice his grandfather and father had made before him, imprisonment. But not just any prison. It had to be somewhere the Titans couldn't escape, somewhere so secure, so absolute, that even beings of cosmic power couldn't break free. There was only one place that fit, Tartarus. The same abyss that had been there since the beginning. The misty pit that existed below everything else. The place so deep and dark that even mentioning it made gods nervous. The descriptions varied, but the consensus was this. Tartarus was as far below the underworld as the earth was below the sky. If you dropped an anvil from earth, it would fall for 9 days before hitting the underworld. Drop it from the underworld, 9 more days to Tartarus. That's not just far. That's cosmically, impossibly, nightmarishly far. It was the perfect prison, and Zeus intended to use it. The defeated Titans were rounded up. Kronos and his closest allies, the ones who'd fought hardest, who'd commanded armies, who'd refused to surrender until the very end, They were going down to the deepest part of Tartarus, where the darkness was so complete that even divine eyes struggled to see. Atlas was there, proud even in defeat. Hyperion, his light extinguished. Iapetus, Chios, Krios, all the titans who'd stood with Kronos until the end. They were chained with bonds forged by the Cyclopes, unbreakable and eternal. Zeus personally led them down, through the earth, through the underworld that his brother Hades would soon rule, down into depths that made the journey feel endless. The air got thicker, darker. The weight of existence itself seemed to press down from above. Finally, they reached it. Tartarus proper. A place of bronze gates and walls so thick that sound itself couldn't escape. The darkness here wasn't just absence of light, it was presence of something else, something old and hungry and patient. The titans were thrown in, not gently. They tumbled into the darkness, and the bronze gates slammed shut behind them with a sound like the end of the world. But Zeus wasn't done. A prison needs guards, especially when the prisoners are cosmic forces who've ruled reality itself. He turned to the Hecatoncheires, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, who'd turned the tide of the war, who had every reason to hate the titans who'd left them imprisoned. Guard them, Zeus said. Make sure they never escape. Make sure the old age stays buried. The three brothers nodded with their 150 heads. This was a job they'd take seriously. They settled in around Tartarus, 300 hands ready to crush any escape attempt, 300 hands holding the past in its grave. Kronos sat in the darkness with his brothers, feeling the weight of defeat. He'd tried to prevent the prophecy and guaranteed it instead. He'd swallowed his children to protect his rule and created the very enemies who destroyed him. Every action he'd taken had led him exactly here. The irony wasn't lost on him. But not all the titans went to Tartarus. Zeus wasn't his father, or at least he was trying not to be. He understood nuance, mercy, the difference between enemies and people who'd just been on the wrong side. Oceanus, who'd stayed neutral throughout the war, was left alone. He kept his rivers and oceans, kept his domains, and nobody bothered him. Switzerland pays off sometimes. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who'd sided with Zeus, were honored, given positions, granted respect, allowed to walk free in the new order. Rhea was pardoned completely. She'd helped Zeus escape, had suffered under Kronos' paranoia, had earned her freedom. She retired quietly, fading into the background of myths, content to let her children rule. A few other titans who'd surrendered early or helped the Olympians were given clemency. Not full freedom, but not Tartarus either. A sort of house arrest among the gods, watched but not imprisoned. And then there was Atlas. Atlas was special. He'd been the champion of the titans, had fought harder than anyone, had nearly turned the tide several times through sheer strength and determination. Zeus respected that in a way, but Atlas also needed to be punished, made an example of. So Zeus gave him a unique sentence. "You will hold up the sky," Zeus declared. Not the earth, that's a common misconception. The sky, the heavens themselves. That vast dome that Uranos had once been, that had been separated from earth by Kronos' violence. Someone had to hold it up, keep it from crashing back down on the world. That someone was Atlas. He was placed at the western edge of the world, where earth meets heaven, and the weight of the sky was placed on his shoulders. Literally, the entire cosmic ceiling pressing down, requiring every ounce of his legendary strength just to hold. It wasn't death. It wasn't even Tartarus. But it was eternal labor, eternal burden, eternal reminder of what happened when you sided with the losing team. Atlas bore it. What choice did he have? The sky pressed down and he held it, and he'd keep holding it forever. The bronze gates of Tartarus were sealed. The Hecatoncheires stood guard. Atlas held the sky. The defeated titans sat in darkness, waiting out eternity. The old order was finished. Buried, locked away where it could never threaten the new world again. Or so everyone thought. Because in Greek mythology, nothing ever stays buried forever. The past has a way of coming back. Prophecies echo across generations, and the children of imprisoned titans would remember. But that was a problem for another age. For now, the prison held. The war was over. Justice, or something resembling it, had been served. The age of titans was done. The age of gods was beginning. Chapter 14. The New Order, Dividing Creation. With the titans imprisoned, and the war finally over, Zeus faced a new challenge, actually running the universe. Turns out, overthrowing your father and winning a decade-long war is one thing. Figuring out who gets to control what afterward? That's politics. And politics among gods is somehow even messier than politics among mortals. The Olympians gathered on Mount Olympus, their new headquarters, taller than Othries, closer to the sky, symbolically and literally above the old order. They sat in a circle, 6 siblings who'd been through hell together, and now had to divide up creation. "So," Poseidon said, breaking the awkward silence, "how do we do this?" Zeus had thought about it. A lot. During those last days of war, during the march to Tartarus, during the quiet moments after victory, when the adrenaline faded and reality set in, he could just declare himself absolute ruler. He'd led the rebellion after all. He'd struck the final blow against Kronos. But that's exactly what Kronos would have done. And Zeus was trying, really trying to be different. "We draw lots," he said. "Fair chance for all three of us." The sisters immediately spoke up. "Three?" Hera's voice was sharp. "There are 6 of us." Zeus looked uncomfortable. This was the messy part. The major realms, sky, sea, and underworld, the 3 brothers will make the important decisions while we... What? Sit quietly? Demeter crossed her arms. "We fought the same war, bled the same blood, spent the same years inside Father's stomach," Hestia added quietly. Zeus held up his hands. "You'll have domains, honored positions, but someone has to rule the major realms and you've already decided it's the men," Hera finished. The tension was thick enough to cut. This was the problem with divine families, all the dysfunction of mortal families, but with cosmic power and eternal grudges. After considerable argument, after a lot of arguing that got pretty heated, they reached a compromise. The 3 brothers would cast lots for the 3 major realms, sky, sea, and underworld. The sisters would receive their own domains and considerable power. Not equal to the brothers, because apparently some patriarchal nonsense survived even the war, but significant enough that they weren't just decorations. 3 lots were prepared. 3 pieces of fate determining who'd rule what. Zeus drew first. Sky. Lightning crackled around him as if the heavens themselves were confirming the choice. He'd be king of the gods, ruler of the upper air, commander of storms and weather, the boss, essentially. Poseidon drew second. Sea. All the oceans, all the waters, every wave and current and deep place. He grinned the sea suited him, wild, tempestuous, unpredictable. He'd make those waters his own. Hades drew last. Underworld. The realm of the dead, the shadows beneath, everything that fell below. He looked at the lot for a long moment, expression unreadable. It wasn't exactly the prize realm nobody dreams of ruling the dead, but it was his now. "Earth remains common to all," Zeus declared. "No one god rules it. We share responsibility." That was diplomatic. It also meant Earth would become a constant source of divine arguments, but nobody was thinking that far ahead yet. The sisters received their honors. Hestia, eldest of the 6, became goddess of the hearth and home. Every fire, every household, every sense of belonging and warmth. It seemed small until you realized she'd be worshipped in every house in the world. Demeter took harvest and agriculture, the growing things, the crops, the cycle of seasons. Life from Earth. She'd make mortals understand that food didn't just appear, it came from her blessing. Hera became queen of the gods. Zeus's wife they'd marry soon, in a political alliance that would be famously rocky and goddess of marriage and family. The irony of that last part, given how their marriage would go, was lost on everyone at the time. The division wasn't perfect. There were arguments about boundaries, overlapping domains, who got jurisdiction over what. Poseidon thought earthquakes should be his because they involved shaking. Zeus argued they were atmospheric phenomena. They compromised by both claiming credit whenever one happened. But slowly, the structure emerged. A hierarchy, a system, the Olympian order. Zeus at the top, king and ruler, commander of sky and storm. Poseidon as lord of seas, equal in power if not in rank. Hades ruling the underworld, separate but respected. The sisters holding their own domains, powerful in their own right even if the system didn't treat them as equals. And beneath them, a whole bureaucracy of minor gods, spirits, and divine functionaries. Every river needed a god. Every mountain, every forest, every aspect of existence. The Olympians would appoint them, organize them, create a divine hierarchy that actually functioned. It was better than Kronos' rule. More organized. More fair, at least by ancient standards. Power was distributed instead of hoarded. Multiple voices instead of one tyrant. But it wasn't perfect. Zeus held ultimate authority. The king could overrule anyone. And Zeus, for all his good intentions, had his father's blood. That same paranoia lurking underneath. That same fear of being overthrown. He'd already heard whispers of prophecies, that his own children might threaten him, that the cycle might continue. He told himself he'd handle it better than Kronos had. He wouldn't swallow his children, wouldn't become a tyrant. He really believed that. Time would prove him partially right and partially very, very wrong. But for now, in those early days after victory, things seemed hopeful. The Titans were imprisoned. The gods were organizing. Creation was being structured and ordered and made sensible. Mount Olympus rose into the clouds, home of the new divine order. Below, mortals would start building temples, offering sacrifices, praying to these new gods who'd won the Great War. The Golden Age was truly over. The Age of Gods had begun. And it would be glorious and terrible in equal measure, because that's how these things always go. Zeus sat on his new throne, lightning crackling around him, and looked out at the world he now ruled. "Let's not screw this up," he muttered to himself. Spoiler alert, they would screw it up, repeatedly, in spectacular ways, but that's a different story. Chapter 15. Epilogue. Echoes of the War. The war was over, but its scars would last forever. If you knew where to look, and when I say you, I mean the mortals who'd eventually spread across the world, you could see the evidence everywhere. That weirdly shaped mountain range? Probably a titan's body thrown by Zeus. That unusually deep-sea trench? Poseidon getting creative with his trident. That valley that shouldn't exist based on normal geography? Battle site from year 6 of the war. The earth itself had been reshaped. The map was different. Rivers flowed in new directions because their old courses had been obliterated. Islands existed that hadn't been there before. Entire regions were just gone, erased by divine violence. Mortals would tell stories about it for generations. They passed down tales of the Great War, each telling adding new details, removing others, transforming history into mythology. The Titanomachy became legend, became the foundation story for why the world was the way it was. Why does Atlas hold up the sky, Grandpa? Because he fought against Zeus and lost child. It's a reminder, don't challenge the gods. The stories served a purpose. They explained things. Why you should honor the Olympians. Why the old gods were gone. Why change was both necessary and dangerous. Why sons always seemed to rise against fathers, generation after generation. Because that cycle hadn't ended. Zeus had fulfilled the prophecy, yes, had overthrown Kronos just like Kronos had overthrown Uranos. The pattern was complete, except it wasn't. Not really. Zeus tried to be different. He really did. He ruled more fairly than Kronos, at least at first. He listened to counsel, shared power. Didn't imprison his siblings in his stomach, which was a low bar but still an improvement. But he'd heard prophecies too, warnings about his own children, about a son who might overthrow him. And that same fear that had consumed Kronos was already growing in the back of his mind like a weed in fertile soil. He'd make different mistakes than his father. But he'd make mistakes. There was Métis, the clever Oceanid who'd helped him win the war. He'd marry her, get her pregnant, then swallow her whole because a prophecy said their son would overthrow him. Sound familiar? Zeus apparently didn't see the irony. At least Athena, their daughter, would eventually burst fully grown from his head, so that worked out, sort of. There were the children he'd have with various goddesses and mortals, dozens of them, a whole pantheon of demigods and minor deities, each with their own drama. Some would threaten his rule, some would defend it. All would prove that cycles don't break easily. The Titans in Tartarus weren't done either. They'd sit in darkness, waiting, plotting, hoping. Some would eventually be released, pardoned, brought back into the light. Others would stay imprisoned forever, their names becoming warnings whispered to young gods. Behave, or you'll end up like Kronos. Atlas would hold the sky for eternity, his punishment a constant reminder visible to anyone who looked west. Some heroes would eventually visit him, use him, even temporarily relieve him of his burden. But he'd always end up back there, shoulders bent, holding up the heavens because someone had to. The war had other consequences too. The Cyclopes became the smiths of the gods, forging weapons and armor in volcanic forges. The Hecatoncheires stayed in their guard posts, eternal jailers of the defeated. The minor gods and spirits who'd fought on either side found their loyalties remembered, rewarded, or punished for generations. And there were threats still to come. Typhon, the most terrible monster ever born, would rise and challenge Zeus, nearly winning. The Gigantomachy would see the giants born from Uranos' blood, way back at the beginning, try their own rebellion. The gods would face crisis after crisis, learning that victory in war doesn't guarantee peace. But those were future problems. For now, there was just the aftermath, the rebuilding, the reorganization of existence itself. Mortals started thriving again. The golden age was gone, sure, but life continued. Harder than before, more uncertain, but humans are adaptable. They built civilizations, created art, told stories about the gods who ruled them, trying to make sense of these powerful, flawed, immortal beings who shaped their world. The gods watched from Olympus, sometimes helping, sometimes interfering, always making things more complicated than they needed to be, because that's what gods do. On quiet nights, when the storms cleared and the seas calmed, you could almost hear it, the echo of that 10-year war, the thunder of Zeus's lightning, the crash of waves, the impact of boulders thrown by hundred-handed giants, the screams of titans being cast into Tartarus. History doesn't disappear. It echoes. It repeats. It teaches lessons that nobody seems to learn. Zeus would sit on his throne sometimes, looking out at the world, and wonder if he'd really broken the cycle or just continued it in a new form. He'd overthrown a tyrant by becoming powerful enough to be a tyrant himself. He'd freed his siblings only to put himself above them. He'd won freedom from his father by taking it through violence. Was that progress? Or just the same pattern wearing a different face? The answer, like most things in Greek mythology, was complicated. The sun rose over Mount Olympus, painting the clouds gold and purple, illuminating the home of the gods. Below, the world stretched out scarred, reshaped, but still beautiful, still worth fighting for, even if the fighting had cost so much. The age of Titans was over. The age of gods had begun. And somewhere in Tartarus, in darkness so complete that even hope struggled to survive, Kronos sat with his brothers and contemplated eternity. He'd tried to prevent the prophecy, had done terrible things to avoid his fate, had swallowed his children, become a monster, guaranteed his own downfall through the very actions meant to prevent it, and his son, sitting on a throne made of clouds and lightning, would eventually learn the same lesson. You can't escape prophecy. You can't stop change. You can't hold power forever, no matter how tightly you grip it. The wheel keeps turning. Sons rise, fathers fall. The cycle continues. And the gods, immortal and powerful, and ultimately just as trapped by fate as anyone else, would keep making the same mistakes. That's the real lesson of the Titanomachy. Not that good defeats evil, or that justice prevails, or that the new generation is better than the old. Just that change is inevitable. Power is temporary. And family drama, apparently, is eternal. The war was over, but its echoes would ring through eternity.